Now once you understand how you can make the API for your application, let's back to the front end and access this API and get all the data from the MongoDB database instead of getting the data from this data.json file. So let me close both these files, minimize all the folders, and you can see inside this table, I'm getting the data from the data.json file, and we iterate over this data using this statement. Now what I want to get this data from the MongoDB. So what I have to do is I have to fetch that data and then return it. For that, we can use a fetch function of JavaScript. So instead of adding that function inside this component, I'm going to create a new folder for that. Inside this project, I'm going to create a new folder, name this folder lib, and then inside this folder, I'm going to create a new file, helper.js, and here I'm going to create that function. So I'm going to say here export constant get user is equal to, and then I'm going to pass a function here. Inside this function, what you have to do is you have to fetch your API data. So we need to call the fetch function of JavaScript, and this function is going to take the URL as a first argument. So here we need to pass the URL. So if I open the Postman API testing tool, then you can notice this is the API for getting all the data of the users as a response. When I make a GET request, I'm going to get all the data of the user. Let me copy this URL back to the get user, and here I'm going to pass that URL, something like this. But now what if you change this URL when you deploy your application? In that case, you have to change all these fetch function values individually. Instead of doing that, you can store this base URL. Here, I'm going to create a variable called constant. In the capital letters, I'm going to specify base URL is equal to, and then I'm going to grab this HTTP right from here, cut that, and then specify that right here. And instead of this API users, right now before this API here, I'm going to pass $, and in the curly braces, I'm going to pass this base URL. Now this fetch function is going to return a response. So we have to get that response inside a variable. So before this fetch function right here, I can see here constant response, and this fetch function is going to return a response to this response variable. Now, just for that, let me make this function asynchronous by passing here a keyword called async, and we need to pass here await. So now this is a complete asynchronous function. Just for that, when we have the data from the database inside this response variable, we need to convert that into JSON format. So I'm going to say here constant JSON is equal to await response.json. Now once we convert that data inside the JSON format, we can easily return that. So I can say here return JSON, this data. Now let me save the changes and call this get user inside my table. So let me just open the table. At the top right up here, I'm going to say import get user from the lib helper file, and then right down here I'm just going to say console.log. Then I'm going to save the changes, and you can see inside the console we get a response. So the function is going to return a promise, and this promise is now fulfilled. And inside this promise result, you can see we have two objects. Now just for that, if you want to print this data inside a console, you can just get rid of this console and then specify here .then, and then specify here response console.log response. Save the changes. I'm going to get the response as an array. Here I have two records, you can see. Now let me just get this data and display it inside this table. But before doing that, let me just change this image. Let me specify styling to this image. So I'm going to just scroll down, and to this img tag, I'm going to specify some classes, some Tailwind classes. So we first specify height, which is 8. Width is also going to be 8. Then we specify rounded, full, and then specify object cover. Let me save the changes. Back to the project, and you can see I'm going to have the response what I want. Next, what we are going to do is I'm going to get the data from the MongoDB database using React query.